Have you ever wondered what happens when a man's most cruel words, intended to bury his ex-wife's dignity, become the biggest joke in Buenos Aires high society? This isn't a Hollywood fantasy. It's a chillingly real story. It's a story about how the darkest shadows can devour those who cast them. And in just 2 weeks, a magnate's world would completely collapse when the woman he thought he had erased appeared on the cover of a prestigious magazine, with a man whose name could buy and sell his entire empire. This is the chronicle of how a silenced woman became the most envied person in the city. The air in the grand ballroom of the Hotel Alvear Palace was thick with the scent of old money and boundless ambition. It was the annual gala of the Legado Foundation, an event that, more than charity, was a silent, brutal calculation of the social hierarchy of the Argentine elite. At the center of one of the most fawning circles was Leonardo Bianchi. At 52, he was a man sculpted by ambition. His real estate empire, Bianchi Desarrollos, was a testament to his cruelty, and his recent divorce was, in his eyes, another successful acquisition. Freedom. Clinging to his arm was Valentina, a 28-year-old influencer whose main skill was to appear perpetually surprised and delighted. Her laugh was a high, tinkling sound that punctuated Leonardo's grandiose declarations. The market is talking, but only for the bold. Not for dead weight, Leonardo declared to a captive audience of fund managers and their wives. He gave Valentina a possessive squeeze on the waist, a gesture that went unnoticed by no one. He was talking about business, but everyone knew he was also talking about Sofia. His divorce from Sofia Rios, his wife of 25 years, had been finalized 6 months earlier. For over 2 decades, Sofia had been the silent partner in his ascent. She was the one who had charmed the old aristocratic families, who remembered the names of their children and their favorite charities, who had transformed his austere, modernist penthouse into a warm and welcoming home, where deals were sealed at her perfectly orchestrated dinner parties. She had put her promising career as an art historian on indefinite hold to build the Bianchi empire. Her payment was a summary execution of their marriage, delivered on their 25th anniversary. Later that night, fueled by aged champagne and an outrageously inflated sense of self, Leonardo was at his peak near the silent auction tables. Marco Gomez, a rival developer, approached with a playful smile. "Leonardo, good to see you," Marco began, his eyes flicking to Valentina. "You look revitalized." "I am, Marco. I've cut out carbs." Leonardo chuckled, and his cronies laughed along. "And other unnecessary baggage." Speaking of which, Marco lowered his voice conspiratorially. "I saw Sofia the other day at the Malba. She was just there." The unspoken words hung in the air. She looked diminished. She looked lost. She looked old. Leonardo's face hardened. The mere mention of her name felt like a stain on his triumphant night. He wanted the world to see him as a reborn man, not as a man who had simply traded his wife for a newer model. He needed to control the narrative. "Sofia," he said, his voice just loud enough for several people to turn. He adopted a look of feigned pity. "The poor thing. I wish her all the best. I truly do. But let's be honest." He leaned in, his voice a theatrical whisper that carried across the polished marble. "The woman is 48. She gave me the best years of her life, and I'm grateful." He paused for dramatic effect. "But she's past her expiration date. She's simply too old for the dating game now. Who's going to want a woman her age starting over? It's a tragedy, really." The words were a dagger, sharp and precise. Some people winced. Some of the women, Sofia's contemporaries, exchanged uncomfortable glances, but the men nodded with a kind of grim understanding. Valentina simply laughed, tightening her grip on his arm, her youth a shield against the casual cruelty of his statement. What Leonardo didn't notice was the quiet figure standing just behind a large floral arrangement. Carmen Damian, Sophia's best friend, and a well-connected journalist who had heard every poisonous word. Her eyes narrowed, and she discreetly typed a note into her phone. Miles away, in a quiet apartment in Recoleta that felt more like a library than a home, Sofia Rios was unaware of the latest public nail her ex-husband was hammering into the coffin of her dignity. She was surrounded by books on Renaissance art, the scent of old paper a comforting balm. The divorce had left her financially secure, but emotionally hollow. She had spent 25 years orbiting Leonardo, her own light dimmed so his could shine brighter. Now, in the sudden darkness, she felt invisible. Her phone buzzed. It was Carmen. "Sophia, are you sitting down?" Carmen's voice was tight with fury. "I'm always sitting these days," Sophia replied with a weak laugh. "What's wrong?" Carmen recounted the conversation, word for brutal word. Sophia listened in silence, her hand clenching the armrest of her chair so hard her knuckles went white. Every syllable was a physical blow. Past her expiration date. Too old to date. A tragedy. It wasn't just that he had said it. It was that he had said it with such public, condescending pity. He hadn't just divorced her. He was trying to erase her, to define her as a relic of his past, a used thing with no future value. When Carmen finished, the silence on the line was heavy. "Sophia, are you there?" A single tear traced a path down Sophia's cheek. She wasn't sad. Sadness had been a dull ache for months. This was something new. This was a cold, clarifying rage. "I'm here, Carmen." Her voice was surprisingly steady. "Thank you for telling me." "What are you going to do?" Sophia looked around her apartment, at the books that were her only companions, at the reflection in the dark window of a woman she barely recognized. Leonardo had built his world on perception. He believed he had crafted her public image as a pitiful, forgotten woman. "I'm going to change the narrative," she said, the words feeling like a promise. "He thinks I'm invisible. He's about to find out what happens when a woman has nothing to lose." She didn't know how. She had no plan. But for the first time in a long time, the woman who had been defined by her husband for 2 decades felt the first glimmer of the person she used to be, a woman of intellect, passion, and an iron will that had merely been dormant, not dead. The tragedy wasn't her age. The tragedy was that she had ever believed her value was tied to him, and that was a mistake she would never make again. Do you think Sophia will be able to change the perception Leonardo has created of her? How do you think she will do it? The days following Carmen's call were a whirlwind of quiet fury. Sophia's rage didn't manifest in shouting or tears, but in a tense, focused energy that hummed just beneath her skin. The outside world felt hostile. Every time she left her apartment, she imagined people looking at her with the same pity Leonardo had projected. She saw him everywhere, his smug face on a business magazine cover at a newsstand, his name on a new luxury housing development she passed while walking. It was inescapable. Carmen, ever the loyal general, tried to cheer her up. "We've got to get you out of there, Sophia. Let's go to that new cocktail bar in Palermo. It's full of artists and writers, not those financial vultures Leonardo used to hang out with." "And why, Carmen?" Sophia asked listlessly, turning the pages of a book on the works of Artemisia Gentileschi. "To show myself off like a prize mare waiting for someone to notice I'm not quite ready for the glue factory?" "Stop it!" "Stop talking like him," Carmen chided gently. "His words are poison. It's hard not to drink it when he's poured it into the city's water supply." Despite her friend's efforts, Sophia retreated further into her shell. She felt like a ghost haunting the life she once had. The divorce settlement had been generous, but the money felt like severance pay for a long and thankless job. What she missed was not Leonardo, but a sense of purpose, of structure, a feeling of being a part of something. Now her days were formless, a vast, empty canvas. One rainy Tuesday afternoon, as she sorted through old mail, her hand brushed against a thick, cream-colored envelope she had ignored for weeks. It was embossed with the logo of the Fondation de la Croix, a private arts organization known for its stunning collection of post-impressionist and modern art. She opened it with a letter opener, her movements mechanical. It was an invitation, not to a gala or a fundraiser, but to a private symposium. The Patron's Gaze, a symposium on private collecting and public trust, and it was a small, exclusive event for curators, academics, and a handful of major patrons. She realized with a jolt that her name was still on their list from her days as a doctoral student, long before she became Mrs. Leonardo Bianchi. Her first instinct was to throw it away. The thought of walking into a room full of people, of making small talk, was exhausting. She would be an outsider, a relic from a different life. Then her eyes landed on the list of speakers. The keynote would be given by Dr. Gabriel Delacroix. The name gave her a strange buzz. Gabriel Delacroix was a legend, but also a ghost. He was a tech billionaire, the architect behind the revolutionary data encryption firm Egida, a company so powerful and ubiquitous it operated quietly in the background of half the world's digital transactions. But unlike his peers, Delacroix was pathologically private. He didn't give interviews, had no social media presence, and was rarely photographed. His only known public's passion was art. He was rumored to own one of the world's most significant private art collections, a collection no one had actually seen. Sophia had followed his supposed acquisitions for years, the way a sports fan tracks their favorite team. He bought with the eye of a scholar, not an investor. He had once paid a record-breaking sum for a minor Camille Pissarro landscape, not because it was famous, but because it was the last piece Pissarro painted before his eyesight began to fail, and the brushwork told a story of urgency and failing light. This was a man who understood art not as a commodity, but as a language. The symposium was the next day. A wild, terrifying idea began to form in her mind. What if she went not to meet anyone, not to network, not to prove Leonardo wrong, but for herself? To spend a day in a world that had once been her entire universe. To hear people speak the language she loved. To feel, if only for a few hours, like the woman she was before she became a wife. "I'm going out," she told Carmen on the phone that night. "A miracle! Where? Should I put on heels?" "No, it's something for me." The next day, Sophia stood in front of her closet, a place full of designer gowns and power suits chosen to complement Leonardo's image. They felt like costumes for a role she no longer played. In the back, she found a simple charcoal gray dress, a well-made piece she had bought for her doctoral defense years ago. She paired it with low, sensible heels and a simple silver necklace. She didn't look like a billionaire's ex-wife or a socialite. She looked like what she was, a scholar. The symposium was held in the Foundation's private house, a magnificent limestone building near Avenida Alvear. The atmosphere was hushed and academic. No press, no photographers, just the low murmur of intelligent conversations and the scent of old wood and lemon wax. Sophia felt a wave of anxiety, but also a flicker of coming home. She slipped into a seat at the back of the small auditorium, content to be anonymous. The panels were fascinating debates on provenance, the ethics of repatriation, and the role of digital archives. For the first time in months, Sophia wasn't thinking about Leonardo, or Valentina, or what people thought of her. She was completely absorbed. Scribbling notes in a small moleskin notebook, the final speaker was Gabriel Delacroix. He wasn't what she expected. He was tall and lean, perhaps in his mid-50s, with silver at his temples and eyes that seemed to absorb everything around him. He wore a simple, dark tweed jacket, no tie. He didn't speak from a podium, but walked slowly across the stage, his voice quiet and measured. His talk was brilliant. He spoke of art as a form of data, a repository of human experience, emotion, and history that was more complex and valuable than any digital code. He argued that collectors were not owners, but custodians, with a duty to preserve and eventually share. During the Q&A, a curator from the Malba asked a question about a recently discovered and disputed Modigliani sketch. The consensus of experts was that it was a clever forgery. Before Delacroix could answer, Sophia felt an irresistible pull. Without even thinking, she raised her hand. A moderator, surprised to see a hand in the back row, gestured to her. "Excuse me, Dr. Delacroix," she began, her voice clearer than she expected. "Although the craquelure is inconsistent with Modigliani's typical canvas preparation of the time, has anyone analyzed the pigment composition of the underlying drawing? His early work in Livorno, before moving to Paris, often used a specific burnt sienna earth, which was ground with a higher than usual linseed oil content. It creates a very particular chemical signature that would be nearly impossible for a forger to replicate unless they were also a materials historian." The room went silent. A few people twisted in their seats to look at her. Her analysis was arcane, specific, and deeply insightful. It was the kind of detail only someone who had spent hundreds of hours studying the subject would know. Gabriel Delacroix paused and looked directly at her. His gaze wasn't one of evaluation or dismissal. It was one of genuine, intellectual curiosity. A slow smile spread across his face. "That," his voice boomed across the quiet room, "is an extraordinarily astute observation. No, it has not been analyzed that way. You have just given the Reina Sofia Conservation Department a new line of inquiry." He held her gaze for a moment longer. "Thank you, Miss Rios," she said, her heart pounding. "Sofia Rios." He nodded slowly. "Miss Rios, thank you." As the symposium broke for a small reception, Sophia, flustered by her own audacity, tried to slip out unnoticed. She had done what she came to do. She had remembered who she was. "Miss Rios." She turned. Gabriel Delacroix was there, holding 2 glasses of water. He offered her one. "I was hoping I could have a moment," he said. "Your observation about the burnt sienna earth wasn't just astute. It was brilliant. That's a level of material knowledge rarely found outside a restoration lab." "I'm a conservator now," Sophia said, taking the glass. "An art historian. Or I was. It's been a while." "A passion like that doesn't just go away," he said, his eyes kind. "Perhaps it lies dormant." He was looking at her mind. For the next hour, they stood in a quiet corner of the reception, and for the first time in 25 years, Sophia talked about art. She talked about the way Gentileschi used chiaroscuro, not just for dramatic effect, but as a weapon. She talked about the hidden political allegories in Renaissance portraits. She forgot where she was. She forgot about Leonardo. She forgot she was supposed to be too old. She was just Sophia. And for the first time, she felt that was more than enough. When she finally stepped out of the house into the late afternoon air, The city looked different. The lights seemed brighter, no longer hostile, but full of promise. She had walked into that building as a ghost, but she was walking out as herself. Do you think this encounter will change Sophia's life forever? What do you think will happen next? The days following the symposium were a revelation. Sophia had expected the encounter with Gabrielle Delacroix to be a singular bright spot in her otherwise gray existence. She had not expected a follow-up. But 2 days later, a messenger delivered a small, flat package to her apartment. Inside was not flowers or champagne, but a rare first edition of a book on the chemical composition of 18th century pigments. Inside was a handwritten note on thick, cream-colored cardstock. Miss Rios, your insights have stayed with me. I suspect you might be one of the few people who would appreciate the chapter on Venetian ceruse. If you have the time, I would be honored if you would join me for a private viewing of some pieces that pose similar questions. Sincerely, Gabrielle Delacroix. He had included a private number. Sophia's hand trembled as she held the card. This wasn't a date, not in the traditional sense. It was an invitation into a world she believed was closed to her forever. It was a gesture of profound intellectual respect. She called the number. Their first date was not at a trendy restaurant or a flashy club. He sent a discreet car to pick her up, and it took her not to a public museum, but to an unmarked, climate-controlled warehouse on the outskirts of the city. Inside was a private gallery that took her breath away. It was a museum of one. Rothko canvases bled color across one wall. A Giacometti sculpture stood hauntingly in the center of the room, and a Francis Bacon triptych screamed silently from another. Gabriel was waiting for her, dressed in a simple cashmere sweater and trousers. There were no assistants, no curators. He just wanted her to see them without distractions. To listen to what they have to say, he explained. For 3 hours, they walked and talked. He didn't lecture. He asked questions. He wanted her opinion, her visceral reaction, her academic interpretation. He would stand in front of a painting, his head tilted, and say, "I see despair here, but you mentioned something about Gentileschi using darkness as a weapon. Do you see that in this? Is the darkness a void, or is it an active presence?" Sophia, who had spent years making small talk about golf handicaps and summering on the coast, felt her mind unfurl like a sail catching the wind. She was eloquent, passionate, and brilliant. She challenged his interpretations, offered her own, and pointed out details he, the owner, had never noticed. This became their routine. Their courtship was a series of quiet, extraordinary adventures. One day, he flew her on his private jet to Mendoza, not for a day of wine tasting, but to spend 2 hours in a conservation lab at a private museum, looking at a newly acquired Degas sculpture under a microscope. Another night, they didn't go out at all. He came to her apartment, and they sat on the floor, surrounded by her art books, playfully arguing about the influence of Japanese woodcuts on Van Gogh. He never mentioned her past, her divorce, or Leonard. It was as if her life had only begun the moment she stood up at that symposium. He was interested in the Sophia Rios, who existed outside of any man's shadow. He was captivated by her mind, her passion, and the quiet strength she was only just rediscovering in herself. "You have an astonishing eye, Sophia," he told her one night, as they stood in front of a moody, beautiful portrait by an unknown Flemish master. "It's a gift. To let it lie dormant is a crime against an entire field of study." "I didn't think anyone cared about this field anymore," she admitted, her voice soft. "Or about me?" He turned to look at her, his expression serious. "The world is loud, and it celebrates the wrong things. It celebrates noise over substance, perception over reality. But that doesn't mean substance and reality have lost their value. It just means they're harder to find. He paused, his gaze soft and infinitely more precious when you do find them. Meanwhile, Leonardo Bianchi was living in a very different reality. His life with Valentina was a whirlwind of public appearances and forced happiness. They were at every opening, every launch party, their photos plastered across gossip sites. Leonardo loved it. He felt powerful, desired. A king with his young queen. He heard whispers about Sofia through the gossip mill. Marco Gomez had mentioned seeing her with some sort of academic. Leonardo laughed. "Good for her," he told Marco during a squash game, his voice dripping with condescension. "I'm glad she found a friend. Probably some dusty professor. As long as she's happy, right?" He genuinely believed it. He couldn't conceive of a world where Sofia could find anyone who wasn't a pale, pathetic shadow of himself. In his mind, he was the pinnacle. Anyone she found would be a step down, proof that he had been right to leave her. Valentina, whose worldview was shaped by social media metrics, reinforced his delusion. Like, who would seriously date someone that old? She had said one night while scrolling through her phone. No offense to Sofia, but her brand just kind of expired. Leonardo had nodded along, basking in the validation. He was so blinded by his own ego that he didn't notice the signs. He didn't notice that the quiet, deferential woman he had divorced was slowly being replaced by a confident, engaged intellectual. He didn't notice because he had never truly seen her in the first place. The turning point came one night at Gabriel's home, a stunning, minimalist house that valued light and space over ostentation. He had commissioned a report on the feasibility of a new global art foundation, dedicated to funding material historical research and provenance verification. He handed the thick file to Sofia. "I'm thinking of endowing a new foundation," he said simply. "I believe it could change how we protect and understand art, but a foundation is only as good as the person who runs it." He looked directly at her. "I want you to be its director, Sofia. I'll provide the capital. You, the vision. You would have total autonomy." Sofia was speechless. It wasn't just a job offer. It was a restoration. It was him handing her the tools to rebuild the part of her life she had been forced to abandon. Tears welled in her eyes, but for the first time in a year, they were tears of overwhelming gratitude. "Gabriel, you don't have to answer now," he said kindly. "But you should know that I see you, Sofia Rios, and I think you are extraordinary." Later that night, as they stood on his terrace overlooking the city, he gently took her hand. It wasn't Leonardo's possessive grip, but a warm, steady presence. "There's another reason I want you to run the foundation," he said, his voice a low murmur against the city hum. "It would make coordinating our schedules much easier, assuming you'd be willing to marry me." Sofia's heart stopped. It wasn't a grand, dramatic proposal. It was quiet, confident, and completely sincere. It was a proposal from a man who wanted a partner, not a possession. He wasn't asking the woman who would run his household. He was asking the woman who would run a global foundation. He was asking her. She looked at his face, lit by the city lights, and saw her future. It wasn't about the money or the status. It was about respect. It was about being seen. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, Gabriel, I will marry you." They sealed their engagement not with a diamond ring selfie for Instagram, but with a quiet champagne toast, their conversation immediately turning to the exciting plans for their future and for the foundation. They were a team. Neither of them thought of Leonardo Bianchi. But on another side of the city, the gears of fate were turning. preparing for a revelation that would shatter one man's carefully constructed world and expose the void at its center. The quiet courtship was over. The storm was about to break. What do you think will happen to Leonardo now that Sophia is about to marry Gabriel Delacroix? Do you think this story will have an unexpected twist? The next fortnight began like any other for Leonardo Bianchi. He woke up in his sterile, glass-walled penthouse, Valentina still asleep beside him, her face squashed against a silk pillowcase. He went through his morning routine with the precision of a machine. A cold plunge, a custom protein shake, and a scan of the financial news on his tablet. He was on top of the world, and he knew it. A major deal to develop a new luxury tower in the west of the city was close to completion, a deal that would cement his legacy as one of the city's premier developers. He arrived at his office at Bianchi de Sarollos, a monument of steel and ego in the city center, feeling invincible. His assistant, a nervous young woman named Carla, greeted him with his usual espresso. "Good morning, Mr. Bianchi. Your 10 a.m. meeting with the zoning board is confirmed." "Excellent, Carla. Any fires I need to put out?" he asked, heading for his corner office. "No, sir. Everything is quiet." But everything was not quiet. At newsstands across Buenos Aires, a different story was breaking. It wasn't on the cover of La Nación or in the gossip columns. It was on the cover of El Inversor Sofisticado, a sophisticated and influential magazine, read by old money and the truly powerful. It was the kind of magazine Leonardo desperately wanted to be in, but never was. They preferred substance to flash. The cover was a masterpiece of understated elegance. It was a black and white photograph taken by a world-renowned photographer. In it, Sofia Rios was laughing. Not a posed, self-conscious laugh, but one of genuine, unadulterated joy. She wasn't wearing a ball gown, but a simple, elegant cashmere sweater. Her hair was loose, and her face, the face of a 48-year-old woman, was luminous. Her hand rested on the arm of a man who sat beside her, his own expression one of quiet, profound adoration. That man was Gabriel Delacroix. The headline, in bold, classic lettering, read, "Silence Broken. The enigmatic Gabriel Delacroix. On love, art, and the woman who changed everything, announcing his engagement to scholar Sofia Rios." The first tremor of Leonardo's fall didn't happen in his office, but at the exclusive squash club where his rival, Marco Gomez, was having a post-workout breakfast. Marco choked on his avocado toast as his partner slid the magazine across the table. His eyes widened first with disbelief, then with pure, unadulterated schadenfreude. He immediately took a photo of the cover with his phone. The text message hit Leonardo's phone just as he sat down for his meeting. It was from Marco. No words, just the photo of the magazine cover. Leonardo stared at it. His brain couldn't process the image. Sophia laughing with... He squinted. At first, he didn't recognize the man. He looked like a university professor. Then, he read the headline. Gabriel Delacroix. The name hit him like a physical blow. Gabriel Delacroix, the reclusive tech god. The man whose net worth was rumored to be in the 12-figure range, a number that made Leonardo's considerable fortune seem like pocket change. It wasn't possible. This had to be a joke, a sophisticated prank. Sophia, his academic, bookish ex-wife, whom he had publicly pitied for being too old to date, was engaged to one of the wealthiest, most private, and most respected men on the planet. "Mr. Bianchi," one of the zoning officials said, looking at him with concern. "Are you all right? You've gone pale." Leonardo shook his head, trying to clear the fog of confusion and rage. "Fine," he managed to croak. "Let's begin." But he couldn't concentrate. The words at the meeting were just noise. His mind was racing, replaying his own arrogant declarations at the charity gala. Past her expiration date. A tragedy. He had said it so loudly, so publicly. He had defined her as worthless. And now she was on the cover of El Inversor Sofisticado, not as a tragic figure, but as the chosen partner of a man who personified value. The news spread through the city's elite circles like wildfire. Phones buzzed from Recoleta to Palermo. The story was irresistible. It wasn't just about the staggering upgrade in wealth. It was the poetic justice of it all. Everyone had heard Leonardo's cruel words. Everyone had seen him parading his young girlfriend. Now, the tables hadn't just turned. They had been launched into orbit. By the time Leonardo returned to his office, the atmosphere had shifted. The usual deference from his staff was now tinged with something else, a mixture of shock, pity, and a morbid curiosity. Carla couldn't meet his eyes. "Hold all my calls," he snapped, slamming his office door shut. He opened his laptop and found the article online. It was worse than he could have imagined. It wasn't a simple announcement. It was a beautifully written profile, detailing Sophia's brilliant academic past and her sharp, insightful mind. It quoted Delacroix extensively. Sophia possesses a clarity of thought and a passion for truth that is exceptionally rare. The world is full of people who shout. She is one of the few who knows how to listen, who knows how to see. Marrying her is the smartest decision I've ever made. The article went on to announce the formation of the Delacroix Rios Arts Foundation, with Sofia Rios named its inaugural director, endowed with an initial fund of $500 million. Leonardo felt the air leave his lungs. Director of a $500 million foundation. He had reduced her to her age. Gabrielle Delacroix had elevated her for her intellect. He had not just lost the public relations battle, he had been annihilated. He was no longer the successful man who had cast off his aging wife. He was now the idiot who had let an incalculable treasure get away. He was the joke. His personal phone rang. It was Valentina, her voice a panicked shriek. "Leonardo, have you seen it? Everyone is texting me. Jessica from my yoga class sent me the cover. Is it real? Is your ex-wife really marrying that guy? The guy who, owns the internet?" "It's an exaggeration, Valentina," he snapped. His patience had run out. "Well, everyone is talking about it, and they're talking about what you said at the gala. It's super awkward for me now." Her concern was not for him, or even for Sophia. It was for her own social standing, which had become inextricably linked to his. Suddenly, being Leonardo's girlfriend wasn't such a good look. He was no longer the powerful victor. He was the cosmic fool. The final blow came an hour later. It was a call from his main investor on the West Tower project, a conservative old money firm. "Leonardo," the man said, his voice cold and distant. "We're seeing some concerning chatter. This public situation with your ex-wife reflects poorly. It speaks to a certain lack of judgment." "What?" "It's a personal matter. It has nothing to do with business," Leonardo stammered. "In our world, character is business," the investor replied flatly. "Gabrielle Delacroix sits on the board of 2 of our parent companies. We cannot do business with a man who is now, for all intents and purposes, a public embarrassment to him. We are invoking the character clause in our contract. We are withdrawing our funding." The line went dead. Leonardo stared at the phone in his hand. The West Tower, his legacy project, the deal that was supposed to make him untouchable, had vanished. It had evaporated in a single morning, all because of a magazine cover. He had built his empire on perception, and in the blink of an eye, the perception had shifted. He wasn't the shark. He was the bait. He slumped over and put his head in his hands. The silence of his opulent office was suddenly deafening. He had told everyone his ex-wife was a tragedy. He had just realized the tragedy was his own. Do you think Leonardo will learn from his mistakes? How do you think his life will change after this? Humiliation is a potent acid. For Leonardo Bianchi, it burned through his ego, his reputation, and now his finances. The collapse of the West Tower deal sent shockwaves through his company. Bianchi des Arroyos was heavily leveraged, banking on the success of that project. The public withdrawal of a major investor over a character clause was a signal to every other bank and partner. Leonardo was a bad bet. Credit lines tightened. Whispers of insolvency began to circulate. His personal life unraveled just as quickly. Valentina, whose loyalty was to status, not a man, saw the writing on the wall. Their arguments became more frequent and vicious. "This is your fault, Leonardo," she had shrieked during an explosive fight. "You just had to open your big mouth about your ex. You made us a joke. Do you know what it's like to go to brunch and have everyone pity you?" 2 weeks after the magazine came out, Valentina was gone. She didn't even say goodbye in person. Just a short text message before a moving van quietly emptied her belongings from the penthouse. Her Instagram was scrubbed clean of all photos of him, replaced with cryptic posts about new beginnings and cutting toxic energy. Broke and increasingly desperate, Leonardo did what he never thought he would. He tried to contact Sofia. His first attempts were calls and text messages, all unanswered. Then he sent a long, rambling email, a pathetic blend of feigned remorse and veiled threats about their shared history. It, too, was met with silence. Finally, he resorted to the unthinkable. He went to her apartment building in Recoleta, a place he hadn't been since his lawyers had split their assets. He buzzed her apartment, his heart pounding with a toxic cocktail of rage and desperation. A voice answered through the intercom, but it wasn't Sofia's. It was the calm, firm voice of a security professional. "Who's calling for Miss Rios?" "It's Leonardo Bianchi, her ex-husband. I need to speak to her. It's urgent." There was a pause. "Miss Rios is not taking visitors. Please leave the premises, Mr. Bianchi." "Just tell her I'm here. Tell her I need to apologize," he yelled at the small metal box. "If you do not leave, we will be forced to call the police." Defeated, Leonardo stumbled back onto the street. He was blocked, not just from her building, but from her life. From the world of respectability he had once commanded. He looked up at her window, imagining her inside, living a life that was now completely inaccessible to him. Did she hate him? Was she enjoying his downfall? The truth was, Sofia rarely thought about him. Her life was full. She was immersed in the launch of the foundation, recruiting a world-class board of directors, and reviewing grant proposals from scholars around the globe. Her days were a whirlwind of meetings, research, and passionate debate with Gabriel, who was not just her fiancé, but her most enthusiastic intellectual sparring partner. Her happiness was not built on Leonardo's ruin. It was built on her own rediscovery. The news of his professional and personal collapse reached her, of course, through Carmen, who delivered it with a grim satisfaction. Sofia felt a distant, detached sadness, the way one might feel hearing about the misfortune of a former colleague from a long-ago job. He was a chapter in her life that was now closed, and she had no desire to reread it. One evening, she and Gabriel were having a quiet dinner at home. Sofia mentioned Leonardo's failed attempts to contact her. "He seems to be unraveling," she said, not with malice, but with a kind of clinical observation. "Carmen said the West Tower deal was the final nail in the coffin for his company." Gabriel sipped his wine, his expression unreadable. The lead investors in that project, the parent firm, is a private equity group called Northern Star Investments. They value discretion and character above all else. I'm surprised they acted so quickly based on what was essentially high society gossip. Sophia mused. Gabriel put his glass down and looked at her. It wasn't just gossip, Sophia. I sit on the board of Northern Star Investments. Sophia stared at him, the implications slowly sinking in. It felt like a puzzle piece clicking into place. Gabriel, you didn't. I would never. Your revenge, if it can even be called that, was to live a life so full and happy that he became irrelevant. That was your victory, and it was perfect. He paused, choosing his words carefully. However, at our quarterly board meeting, the topic of our portfolio's risk exposure came up. I merely shared my opinion, as a board member, that any firm associated with a man who showed such profoundly deficient judgment, cruelty, and public instability as Leonardo Bianchi was, by definition, an unacceptable risk. Character, as I believe he was told, is business. The board agreed. It was a simple, logical business decision. It was the twist. The one that Leonardo's downfall wasn't cosmic karma or bad luck. It was a quiet, clinical, and utterly devastating checkmate, executed by a man who operated on a level Leonardo couldn't even comprehend. Gabriel hadn't stooped to Leonardo's level. He had simply operated from his own, and in doing so, he had wiped him off the board. It wasn't an act of passion. It was an act of consequence. She reached across the table and took his hand. "Thank you," she said softly. "For what?" he asked, his eyes searching hers. "For seeing a bad investment and protecting your portfolio," she replied. A small, knowing smile played on her lips. He smiled back, a rare, full smile that crinkled the corners of his eyes. The ghost of Leonardo Bianchi had finally been exorcised, not with a scream, but with the quiet closing of a ledger. Weeks later, Carmen sent Sophia a link to a tabloid article. The headline was sensational. "Bankrupt real estate magnate, Leonardo Bianchi, spotted moving into a rental in Buenos Aires suburbs." The accompanying photo was grainy, showing a gaunt, unshaven Leonardo carrying a cardboard box into a modest suburban townhouse. He was alone. Sophia looked at the photo of the man who had declared her old and useless. He had chased youth and perception and had lost everything of real value. She had embraced her age, her intellect, her true self, and had gained a world of substance and happiness. She closed the link without a hint of triumph, just a quiet sense of finality. She turned back to the pile of proposals on her desk, her mind already on the future, a future she was building on her own terms. The narrative was, at last, hers to write. 6 months later, the Delacroix Rios Arts Foundation held its inaugural exhibition. The event wasn't held in a stuffy hotel ballroom, but in a beautifully restored cast-iron building in the Palermo neighborhood. Its industrial bones now housed a state-of-the-art gallery. The air didn't hum with the brittle chatter of social climbers, but with the excited murmur of artists, curators, and academics from around the world. The exhibition, curated and conceived entirely by Sophia, was titled Palimpsesto, The Hidden Stories. It was a stunning collection of works where artists had painted over older canvases or where restoration had revealed hidden histories. At the center of the room, on a simple podium, stood Sophia Rios. Dressed in a striking navy blue dress, elegant rather than ostentatious, she radiated a quiet, self-assured authority. She wasn't Gabriel Delacroix's wife tonight. She was Director Rios, and this was her stage. "A palimpsest," she began, her clear voice echoing through the room, is a manuscript on which a later writing has been superimposed over an earlier erased one. It is a metaphor for memory, for history, for truth, that what is erased never truly disappears. It remains, waiting for a careful eye to discover it. In the audience, Gabriel watched her, his pride a quiet, palpable force. He wasn't in the front, but slightly to the side, allowing her the full spotlight. He was not the source of her light. He was simply happy to stand in its warmth. Near the back of the crowd, a familiar face watched with a look of stunned awe. It was Marco Gomez, Leonardo's old rival. He had wangled an invitation because this was now the most important room in Buenos Aires. He remembered Leonardo's mocking words at the gala with perfect clarity. Too old to date. A tragedy. He looked at the radiant, brilliant woman holding the attention of the art world's most powerful figures, and he felt a chill. Leonardo had seen a faded manuscript and tried to burn it. Gabrielle had seen the same manuscript, recognized its priceless value, and given its author the tools to write her own magnificent new story. The artists here teach us that nothing is ever truly finished, Sophia concluded. We are all layered texts, capable of being revised, restored, and reread in a new and brighter light. Thank you. The applause was thunderous and genuine. When Sophia stepped down, she was surrounded by congratulations. A venerable director from the Louvre complimented her on her vision. A young, explosive artist, whose work she had championed, hugged her with gratitude. After a few minutes, Gabriel worked his way through the crowd to her side. He didn't say a word, just offered her a glass of champagne, his eyes conveying everything. You were brilliant, he murmured, for her ears only. I was me, she said, a smile of pure satisfaction on her face. It was the simplest, most profound truth. Her past was not erased, but it no longer defined her. It was simply the erased text beneath a much more interesting story, one whose most exciting chapters were still yet to be written. In the end, this isn't just a story of revenge. It's a powerful lesson about value. Leonardo Bianchi believed a woman's value was tied to her youth and her proximity to a powerful man. He saw Sophia as an asset whose worth had depreciated. What he failed to grasp is that things like integrity, intellect, and grace have no expiration date. They accrue interest. Sophia's triumph wasn't marrying a billionaire. That was just the dramatic final act. Her true victory was rediscovering her own worth in a world that tried to tell her she had none. She didn't need a man to save her. She just needed to remember the brilliant woman she was before she met Leonardo. Her story is a testament to the fact that the best revenge is not stooping to their level, but building a life so magnificent that they are no longer part of your landscape. What did you think of Sophia's incredible journey? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you believe in the power of rewriting your own story, don't forget to like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe for more real-life dramas that will leave you thinking. The Tycoon's Legacy. Before you dive in, consider this. How much would you sacrifice for a secret you believe is protecting those you love? The air in Aspen, Colorado, was crisp with the first hint of autumn, a stark contrast to the boiling tension in the grand ballroom of the Grand Summit Hotel. This wasn't just a hotel. It was the heart of a vast hospitality empire, and tonight, its CEO, Julian Thorne, was hosting his annual gala. The room glittered with the elite of the finance world. But amidst the shimmering lights, Serena Hayes, Julian's wife of 2 years, felt a quiet desperation. Tucked away in her emerald clutch was a life-altering secret. a positive pregnancy test. After 2 years of a marriage built more on business mergers than on affection, Serena believed this baby would finally bridge the distance between her and Julian. She found him holding court with a group of investors, his face a mask of effortless power. "Julian," she whispered, "can we speak privately?" His gaze, cold as a mountain lake in winter, cut her off. He excused himself with a practiced, charming smile that didn't reach his eyes and led her into his private study, the door closing with a heavy thud. "What could be so urgent as to interrupt me during a crucial negotiation?" he asked, his voice low and dangerous. With trembling hands, Serena pulled out the test. "We're going to be parents, Julian." The silence that followed was more brutal than any argument. Julian took the small plastic stick, examining it as if it were a fraudulent stock certificate. His handsome, chiseled features remained utterly emotionless. "Whose is it?" The question hit Serena like a physical blow. She staggered back, clutching the edge of his mahogany desk for support. "What are you implying? It's yours, of course." Julian's laugh was hollow and without a trace of humor. "Please, Serena, we both know I can't have children. My doctors were very clear about that." The world seemed to tilt on its axis for Serena. "What are you talking about? You never told me." "I didn't see the need to," he said, the coldness in his voice intensifying. "Our marriage was a convenience, a merger of our family's business empires. I never promised you a fairy tale." Tears welled in Serena's eyes, ruining the meticulous makeup she had spent hours applying. "You're lying. You're saying this to hurt me, to justify your absences, your affairs." Julian's face darkened, a flash of pure fury in his eyes. "So now I'm the unfaithful one? How convenient, darling. But this show is over." He walked to the door, flinging it open. The murmur of the party rushed into the room like a tidal wave. Without looking back at her, he uttered the words that would shatter her world. "I want you out of my house tonight. My lawyers will contact you tomorrow." Serena's breath hitched. "You can't be serious. You can't throw me out like this in front of everyone." A cruel smile played on Julian's lips as he walked back into the ballroom. He raised a champagne flute, capturing the attention of the hushed crowd with a gentle clink of glass. "My dear friends, I regret to interrupt this wonderful evening for a personal announcement. As many of you know, honesty and loyalty are fundamental values in my life and in my business. That is why I am forced to inform you that my marriage to Serena has come to an end tonight." A wave of surprise rippled through the room. Serena, frozen in the doorway, felt every gaze like a dagger. Julian continued, his voice perfectly controlled. "The reasons are strictly personal, but I trust you will respect our privacy during this difficult time. The party, of course, continues." With those words, he had sealed her fate. The guests, after the initial shock, began whispering, their theories and rumors feeding the growing scandal. Julian's mother, Eleanor Thorne, a woman of 70 with an unwalkable poise, rushed to Serena's side. "What happened, my dear?" she whispered, taking Serena's hands. "I'm pregnant, Eleanor, and Julian says the baby can't be his. He says he can't have children." Eleanor's eyes widened, then narrowed with a flash of understanding. "My son is a liar. That pride of his, it's just like his father's." Before she could say more, Victoria Hayes, Julian's legal director and rumored mistress, approached with a barely concealed smirk. "Serena, my dear, I've called a taxi. It's waiting at the back entrance to avoid any discomfort." The humiliation was complete. With the last shreds of her dignity, Serena went to her room, packing a small bag with a few essentials. Tears blurred her vision as she took a final look at what had been her home. Photos of her wedding, vacations, moments she had believed were happy. It had all been an elaborate lie. As she went down the service stairs, she ran into Julian's younger brother, Leo, who waited for her with a troubled expression. "I can't believe what my brother is doing," he said, pulling her into a tight hug. "I promise this won't be the end of it." Serena pulled away gently. "Don't get involved, Leo. You know your brother. His pride is stronger than any feeling. But the baby? This baby and I will be fine," Serena said, placing a protective hand over her belly. "I promise." A heavy rain began to fall as she got into the taxi, as if the sky were crying with her. Before she left, she took one last look at the brightly lit mansion, where music and laughter continued, as if nothing had happened. She swore to herself that she would never return, that she would never beg for the love or recognition of a man incapable of feeling. Do you think Serena will ever find happiness after this betrayal? What do you think Julian's true motivation was for acting with such cruelty? Share your thoughts below. 5 years later, Julian Thorne, now 42, stood in his office on the top floor of the skyscraper that housed the headquarters of the Thorne Group. He was the most influential figure in the American tourism industry, with properties on 3 continents. Yet, the premature wrinkles on his forehead and the gray hairs at his temples betrayed the high cost of his success. "The numbers for the last quarter are concerning, Julian," said Victoria, now his official girlfriend and the group's legal director. "The expansion in South America is costing us more than anticipated." Julian barely heard her. The same dream had tormented him the night before. Serena, holding a baby with his own face, crying. He always woke up at the same moment. Just as he tried to touch the child, it vanished from his fingers. "Julian, are you listening?" Victoria's voice brought him back to reality. "Of course. Prepared a detailed report for the board meeting. I don't want any surprises." The international expansion had been his big gamble, but also his biggest strategic mistake. To finance it, he had been forced to take on new investors, making him a hostage to shareholders who didn't share his long-term vision. His control over the empire he had built was weakening with each passing day. His phone interrupted his thoughts. It was Eleanor, his mother. "Son, are you coming to lunch on Sunday? I haven't seen you in weeks." "I'm too busy, Mom. Maybe next month." Eleanor's sigh was filled with disappointment. "Julian, you can't go on like this. Ever since Serena left—" "Don't say her name," he interrupted abruptly. "That woman no longer exists to me. That woman was carrying your child when you threw her out like a criminal. My grandchild, whom I've never met." Julian closed his eyes, trying to control the rage that always consumed him when this subject came up. "You know perfectly well that child couldn't have been mine." "And if it was?" Eleanor challenged him. "Did it ever occur to you that the doctors could have been wrong? Or would you rather believe you're sterile than accept the possibility that you abandoned your own flesh and blood?" Julian hung up without responding. His mother had never understood. She had never seen Serena as the opportunist she was. She had entered his life under the pretense of a business merger, seducing him with her apparent innocence. When he discovered her infidelity, he didn't hesitate to cut ties. But deep down, a doubt gnawed at him. What if his mother was right? What if the doctors had been wrong? He had spent 5 years building a wall around that possibility, refusing to investigate, to look for answers, to know the truth. The annual party for the Thorne Group was in full swing at the Grand Summit Hotel. 5 years after the scandal, no one dared to mention Serena's name in Julian's presence, but rumors of her whereabouts were frequent. Some said she lived in London, others that she had returned to her family's home in New York. No one knew for sure. Julian was toasting with his guests, a practiced smile on his face, when the unmistakable roar of an approaching helicopter broke the evening's harmony. He wasn't expecting anyone else. All the important guests had already arrived. The aircraft landed on the private helipad he had recently built, a symbol of his power and exclusivity. Time seemed to stand still for Julian as he recognized Serena stepping out of the helicopter. She was more beautiful than ever, in a chic red dress that contrasted with her sun-kissed skin. Her hair, once long, was now a more mature, sophisticated bob. But what truly stopped his heart were the 4 identical children who accompanied her, with the same dark hair and piercing eyes he saw in the mirror every morning. Silence fell over the party like a shroud. Serena moved through the crowd with the confidence of someone who knew exactly what she was doing, guiding the 4 children, who walked with her in perfect, dignified order. She stopped in front of Julian, whose face had gone completely pale. "Good evening, Julian," she said, her voice calm, almost cordial. "It's been a long time." Unable to utter a word, Julian stared at the 4 children who observed him with curiosity. They must have been about 4, maybe 5 years old. "We need to talk about the empire that your children will inherit someday," Serena continued, pulling a document from her purse. "I think you'll be interested to know that I own 15% of the shares in your company, enough to demand a seat on the board of directors." Julian's world crumbled around him. The 4 children were living proof of his mistake, his terrible miscalculation. And now Serena had returned, not as the victim he had cast out that autumn night, but as a powerful woman ready to reclaim what was rightfully hers. She had come for revenge, for money, for vindication. As he looked at the 4 little ones who were his spitting image, Julian Thorne knew that nothing would ever be the same again. The house of cards he had built on lies and pride was beginning to collapse, and the worst was yet to come. Follow along to find out what happens next. What do you think Serena's true intentions are? Will Julian's empire survive this unexpected challenge? Share your predictions in the comments below. The family legacy. The first rays of the Colorado sun filtered through the curtains of the master bedroom at the Grand Summit Hotel. But Julian Thorne had been awake for hours. Insomnia had become his constant companion since the night before, when Serena and those 4 children, his children, had stormed into his life like a tsunami threatening to wash everything away. The guests had left, muttering and casting discreet glances, eager to spread the scandal in their social circles. Victoria, her jaw tense and her eyes filled with contained fury, had stood by his side like an ice sculpture, calculating his every move. His mother, Eleanor, had tearfully embraced the children, instantly recognizing the family resemblance in their small faces. Mateo, Gabrielle, Hugo, and Julian. Serena had introduced the quadruplets with maternal pride. "Your grandchildren, Mrs. Thorne." Now, in the solitude of his room, Julian looked at a photograph he had hidden away at the bottom of a drawer. He and Serena, on their wedding day. She was smiling with such genuine happiness that it hurt to look at, while he maintained his serious expression, as if even then he knew the marriage was doomed. "Did you get any sleep?" Victoria's voice startled him. He hadn't heard her enter. "How could I? I have 4 children I never knew about, and an ex-wife who owns enough of my company to overthrow me." Victoria moved closer, wrapping him in a calculated embrace. "You shouldn't worry so much. My contacts at the firm are already investigating how she obtained those shares. If there was any irregularity, we'll find it." Julian pulled away abruptly. "You haven't seen those children, Victoria. They're identical to me. They're mine." The reality of those words hit him with full force. For 5 years, I lived convinced of a lie. And what if that's exactly what she wants you to think? Victoria's voice dripped with sweet venom. This wouldn't be the first time someone used children to manipulate a powerful man. Julian shook his head. He couldn't listen to her insinuations anymore. He needed answers. And only one person could give them to him. The house that Serena had rented on the outskirts of Los Angeles was considerably more modest than the hotel, but it exuded exquisite taste. Meticulously manicured gardens surrounded the property, and the sound of children's laughter floated from the backyard pool. Julian stayed in his car for a moment, gathering the courage to face reality. Finally, He rang the doorbell and waited, his heart pounding in his chest. An older woman with a kind face opened the door. "Mr. Thorne, I presume?" she said, with a distinct South American accent. "Mrs. Hayes is expecting you in the back garden." As he followed the woman through the house, Julian noticed details that revealed the children's presence. Carefully arranged toys, colorful drawings framed on the walls, photographs documenting moments he had never witnessed. Each image was a dagger to his conscience, a reminder of everything he had missed. Serena was sitting at an elegant garden table, with a cup of tea in her hands and documents scattered in front of her. She was dressed simply but elegantly, and the breeze played with her hair. When she saw him, a faint smile appeared on her lips, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Good morning, Julian. I must confess I didn't expect to see you so soon." He sat down across from her, unable to hide his discomfort. "We need to talk. Where do you want to start? With your children? With the company shares? Or perhaps with the 5 years that have passed since you threw me out of your life like a criminal?" The coldness in her voice contrasted with the memory of the sweet, passionate woman she had been. Julian understood that time and pain had transformed her. "Let's start with the children," he said finally. "How is this possible? The doctors told me." "The doctors were wrong," Serena interrupted him firmly. "Or maybe they lied. Or maybe you were the one who preferred to believe a lie rather than trust your wife." Guilt twisted in Julian's stomach like a poisonous snake. "Where are they?" "At school. They're normal children, Julian, despite the extraordinary circumstances of their conception and birth. They go to school, they have friends, they play sports, they have grown up without a father. But they have not lacked love. Why didn't you look for me when they were born? Why wait 5 years? Serena's laugh was bitter. "Are you serious? You publicly humiliated me. You accused me of infidelity. You threw me out of your house without a penny. And you expected me to run to you when I found out I was expecting not 1, but 4 of your children." Julian lowered his gaze, unable to meet the intensity of her eyes. "What do you want now, Serena? Revenge? Money? I want what's fair for my children. I haven't come to destroy you, although I could, with what I know about your business. I've come because one of them, Matteo, needs you. He has developed a rare medical condition that requires specialized treatment. And for that, we need your DNA." The revelation hit Julian like a bucket of cold water. "What's wrong with Matteo?" For the first time, Serena's mask of strength cracked. Her eyes filled with tears she refused to shed. "A rare autoimmune disease. The symptoms started 6 months ago. We've consulted specialists all over the world. The treatment he needs must be personalized based on his complete genetic information. We need samples of your DNA." Julian felt the world stop. One of his sons, a child he didn't know, but who carried his blood, was sick. While he had dedicated himself to accumulating wealth and power, his own children had grown up without him, without his support. "I'll do whatever it takes," he said, his voice broken. "Whatever it takes," Serena agreed, allowing herself a moment of vulnerability. "Thank you." An uncomfortable silence settled between them, full of unspoken words and painful memories. "How did you get the shares?" Julian asked, trying to steer the conversation to a more familiar topic. Serena smiled with a mix of pride and defiance. "I finished my business administration studies while raising 4 babies. It wasn't easy, but I had powerful motivation. When my aunt's inheritance was finally released after a long legal battle, I invested strategically. Your international expansion was hasty, Julian. You made mistakes that any first-year student would have avoided. When the shares fell, I was waiting to buy them." Julian couldn't help but smile wryly. "You were always smarter than me. It's not about intelligence, but about perspective. You only saw numbers and profits. I saw people, needs, real opportunities." The arrival of the children from school interrupted their conversation. The sound of their voices filled the house, approaching the garden like a whirlwind of energy. "Mom, Matteo won the science fair," announced one of them, bursting into the garden, followed by his 3 brothers. The 4 stopped dead when they saw Julian. The silence that followed was the most painful Julian had ever experienced. 4 pairs of eyes, exact replicas of his own, studied him with a mixture of curiosity and wariness. "Children," Serena said in a calm voice, "this is Julian Thorne, your father." Meanwhile, back at the Grand Summit Hotel, Victoria Hayes was having a phone conversation that would change the course of events. "Dad, she's back, and she's not alone." Lawrence Hayes, the owner of the rival hotel chain, smiled on the other end of the line. He had been waiting for years for an opportunity to get revenge on Julian, who had stolen several important contracts from him using questionable methods. "Are you sure they're his children?" "Interesting. Very interesting. Stay close to the situation and keep me informed. This could be the opportunity we've been waiting for." Victoria hung up, looking at the photograph of Julian and Serena she had found in the room. With a look of contempt, she threw it in the trash. No one, least of all that woman from the past, was going to get in the way of her plans. At the Thorne Group headquarters, the news of the return of Serena and the 4 heirs had spread like wildfire. The board of directors had called an emergency meeting. This could completely destabilize the company, argued Roberto Mendez, one of the most senior board members. "Shareholders are nervous. The shares have fallen 3% just this morning. We must issue an official statement to calm the markets." "And what do you propose we say?" asked Leo Thorne, who had taken charge of the corporate social responsibility department after his sister-in-law's departure. "That my brother discovered 5 years later that he has 4 children? That he's been living a lie? That our former CLO has returned with enough shareholder power to challenge the board?" The silence that followed revealed the seriousness of the situation. No one had a satisfactory answer. Meanwhile, at the modest rented house, Julian faced the most difficult moment of his life. Getting to know his children. The 4 boys looked at him with expressions ranging from curiosity to open hostility. "Why did you never come to see us?" asked Hugo, who seemed to be the oldest. The question, so direct and innocent, hit Julian harder than any adult accusation. I thought you weren't my children," he replied with sincerity. The lies had already caused enough damage. "But we look just like you," observed Gabriel, the quietest of the 4. "Everyone says so, I know, and I regret every day that I didn't realize it sooner." Matteo, the sick boy, stood slightly apart, watching him with eyes that seemed to hold a wisdom beyond his years. "Are you going to help me get better?" he asked finally. Julian felt his heart break. He knelt down in front of the boy, looking him in the eyes. "I will do everything in my power to make you well, I promise." "Julian, you have a chance to rewrite your family's story. How do you think you should begin to build trust with your children after being absent for so long? Share your advice." The final chapter, a new beginning. The bright lights of the UCLA Medical Center in Los Angeles instilled equal parts respect and hope. Julian Thorne, sitting in a cold waiting room, was experiencing a vulnerability that was alien to him. The tests to determine his genetic compatibility with Matteo had been scheduled urgently, thanks to his contacts and influence. Next to him, Serena absently flipped through a magazine, though it was clear she wasn't paying attention. The dark circles under her eyes betrayed nights of insomnia and worry for her son's health. "How long has he been sick?" Julian asked, breaking the uncomfortable silence. Serena looked up, surprised by the question. "The first symptoms appeared 6 months ago. At first, we thought it was just a cold. Then came the joint pain, constant fatigue, and unexplained fevers." Her voice cracked slightly, but she quickly regained her composure. "We consulted specialists in London, where we were living. When the diagnosis was confirmed, I knew we had to come back. We needed your DNA for the personalized treatment. Why didn't I just contact you? Would a simple text or call have convinced you after 5 years? I needed you to see them, to recognize yourself in them. Julian couldn't argue with her logic. Distrust had always been his biggest flaw. "Mr. Thorne," a nurse called from the doorway. "Dr. Evans will see you now, the specialist." A middle-aged man with a reassuring demeanor received them in his office. "Mateo's condition is uncommon, but not hopeless," he explained after reviewing the preliminary results. "His immune system is attacking certain cells in his own body, which causes inflammation and tissue damage. With the right treatment, he will be able to live a completely normal life." "And for that treatment, you need my DNA?" Julian asked. "Exactly. The most effective therapy requires the design of specific monoclonal antibodies based on the patient's complete genetic profile. For that, we need samples from both parents. The good news is that, according to these preliminary tests, you are, without a doubt, Mateo's biological father." Those words, spoken with objective scientific precision, confirmed what Julian's heart already knew. They were his children. They always had been. "What are the next steps?" he asked, determined to do whatever was necessary. "We will need to perform a bone marrow extraction. It's an invasive procedure, but essential for the treatment. It will be done under general anesthesia." Julian nodded, though a shiver ran down his spine. Since childhood, hospitals had caused him irrational terror, the result of a traumatic experience when, at the age of 8, he had to undergo emergency surgery after an accident. "Let's do it tomorrow," he decided, ignoring his fear. "And how long will it take for the treatment to be ready after that?" "About 2 or 3 weeks. In the meantime, we will continue with the current therapy to control the symptoms." As they left the consultation, Julian noticed that Serena was watching him with an unreadable expression. "What is it?" he asked. "Nothing. It's just, I didn't expect you to agree so quickly. I remember you being more calculating. People change, Serena. Or maybe you just never truly knew me. Or maybe you're the one who never truly knew yourself," she replied softly. That afternoon, Julian visited his hotel suite to pick up some personal belongings. He had decided to move to a nearby hotel temporarily to be available during Mateo's treatment. He was surprised to find his mother, Eleanor, playing with the 4 children in the park. "Mom, what is this?" Eleanor stood up, her dignity a tangible presence, while the children continued to play happily with a dog Julian didn't remember seeing before. "I invited Serena and my grandchildren to spend the afternoon. This is their home, too. Serena and I are divorced, Mom, and this place is mine." Eleanor looked at him with that expression that, since childhood, had made him feel small and insignificant. "This hotel has been the home of the Thorne family for 3 generations. It belongs to the family, not just to you. And those children are Thornes, whether you like it or not." Julian ran a hand through his hair, frustrated. "Things are not that simple." "Of course they are. You have 4 wonderful children and an ex-wife who, despite all the pain you caused her, has had the generosity to return so you can meet your children and help save one of their lives. What could be simpler than that?" Just then, Mateo approached them cautiously. Of the 4, he was the most reserved, perhaps because of his illness. "Grandma Eleanor says you have pictures from when you were little," he said, looking at Julian. "Can I see them? I want to know if I look like you." Julian's heart skipped a beat at such a simple yet profound request. "Of course, they're in my office. Come on, I'll show you." As they went up the stairs, Julian felt Mateo's small hand find his. That simple gesture of a child's trust disarmed all his defenses. In the office, he took out albums he hadn't looked at in years, photographs of his childhood, family vacations, school sports. "Look, I was your age here," he said, pointing to a picture of him with a swimming trophy. Mateo studied the photo carefully. "You have my eyes and my nose, but Mom says I have her smile." "She's right," Julian said, a bittersweet memory. "Your mother has a beautiful smile." The boy nodded seriously. That's why she doesn't smile much, to save it for special occasions, like she does. The observation, so sharp, yet so innocent, deeply moved Julian. These children had inherited not only his physical features, but also their mother's observant nature and hidden sensitivity. "Tomorrow they'll do some tests on me at the hospital," Julian said, trying to explain the procedure in a way a 5-year-old could understand. "Those tests will help the doctors prepare the medicine you need." Matteo looked at him with his dark eyes, full of an unusual wisdom for his age. "Are you scared?" "I'm scared of needles." Julian couldn't lie in the face of that gaze so much like his own. "Yes, I'm scared. I haven't liked hospitals since I was a little boy." "Me neither," Matteo confessed. "But Mom says sometimes you have to be brave, even if you're scared. Your mother is a very wise woman." Meanwhile, at the Thorne Group headquarters, Victoria Hayes was holding a closed-door meeting with several board members. "Julian is emotionally compromised," she argued with calculated passion. "These personal decisions are seriously affecting the company. The shares continue to fall. Investors are nervous." "What exactly are you proposing?" asked Roberto Mendez, who had always been loyal to Julian. "A vote of no confidence. We need Julian to take a temporary leave while he resolves his family matters. I can assume the executive management during that period." The board members exchanged uneasy glances. What Victoria was proposing was practically a corporate coup. "We would need the support of at least 60% of the shareholders," another board member pointed out. "And Julian controls 40%. Victoria smiled confidently. "Not anymore. With the 15% his ex-wife owns, his control has significantly decreased, and I have reason to believe that Serena Hayes would be willing to support this motion." What Victoria didn't mention was the conversation she had had that morning with her father, Lawrence. He had proposed a merger between the two hotel chains, with him as president of the resulting group and Victoria as CEO. The first step: depose Julian Thorne. The morning of the bone marrow extraction, Julian woke up startled by a recurring nightmare. He saw himself as a child, abandoned in a hospital, while his father walked away without looking back. The fear of needles, of anesthesia, of the absolute vulnerability of being unconscious in the hands of strangers, paralyzed him. "Everything will be fine," Serena reassured him, having come to the hospital to accompany him, though she maintained a clear emotional distance. "It's a routine procedure." The anesthesiologist explained the process. As the nurses prepared the necessary equipment, Julian, dressed in a hospital gown, had never felt so helpless. "When you wake up, it will all be over," the doctor said, as the anesthesia began to take effect. "Think of something pleasant as you go to sleep." The one image that came to his mind in those last moments of consciousness was not of his business successes or his luxurious properties. It was of 4 identical boys laughing in the park, and Serena watching them with a mix of pride and infinite love. When he woke up hours later, the first thing he saw was Serena, dozing in an uncomfortable chair next to his bed. She had stayed there throughout the procedure. "You came back?" he whispered, his voice hoarse from the intubation. Serena opened her eyes, momentarily disoriented. "The boys wanted to know you were okay. I promised them I'd take care of you." The pain in his lower back was intense, but Julian barely noticed. A more powerful sensation filled him: gratitude. "Thank you," he said simply, "for staying, for the children, for everything." Serena looked away, uncomfortable with his unusual vulnerability. "You should rest. The doctor said you can leave tomorrow if everything goes well." But when she tried to get up to leave, Julian gently took her hand. "Stay, please. Just a little longer." And against all odds, she stayed. What do you think of Serena's surprising change of heart? How will Julian's regrets influence his future decisions? Share your thoughts. A new chapter begins. In the following days, while Julian recovered at the Grand Summit Hotel under the care of his mother and with daily visits from the children, Serena dedicated herself to investigating the company's financial situation. Her business background and years of experience allowed her to see clearly what others missed. What she discovered deeply alarmed her. The international expansion that Julian had undertaken was based on loans with abusive clauses and contracts that seriously compromised the company's future viability. Someone had deliberately given him bad advice, leading him toward a planned financial disaster. That someone had a name: Victoria Hayes. The night of the Bonfires Festival illuminated the Californian coast with pyres that reflected on the ocean like fallen stars. The tradition dictated that on the shortest night of the year, wishes written on paper and thrown into the fire would come true, while bad memories would be consumed by the purifying flames. The Grand Summit Hotel, for the first time in 5 years, was bustling with children's activity. The quadruplets, fascinated by the celebration, ran on the private beach under the watchful eye of Eleanor, who had organized a small family party for the occasion. Julian, still in pain from the bone marrow extraction weeks ago, watched the scene from the terrace. The children's laughter mingled with the sound of the waves. "You shouldn't be on your feet so long," Serena's voice surprised him. "The doctor recommended rest." "I'm fine," he replied automatically. "How's Mateo?" "The first results of the treatment are promising. The inflammation has decreased, and the fever hasn't returned in 3 days." An invisible weight was lifted from Julian's shoulders. Since learning of his son's diagnosis, he had lived with a constant fear he would never admit out loud. "I'm glad," he said simply, unable to express the magnitude of his relief. Serena leaned on the railing next to him, watching the children who were now helping Eleanor prepare the bonfire. The closeness of her body, the subtle perfume she had always worn, awakened forgotten memories in Julian. "Do you remember our first night of the bonfires?" she asked, as if reading his mind. "How could I forget? I took you to that hidden cove near Malibu, and we wrote our wishes and threw them into the fire together. I asked for us to start a family," Serena continued, her gaze lost on the horizon. The revelation hit Julian hard. "You never told me. You're not supposed to reveal your wishes if you want them to come true. Although, I guess in the end, it came true in a way neither of us could have imagined." The silence was charged with emotion. "And what did you ask for that night?" Serena finally asked. Julian hesitated before answering. "I asked not to become my father." The irony of that unfulfilled wish hung between them like a ghost. Julian had repeated the very pattern he feared most. "You still have time to break that cycle," Serena said softly, surprising him with her understanding. "They need you, especially Mateo." Before Julian could respond, his phone interrupted the moment. It was Leo, his brother. "Julian, you have to come to the office immediately. Victoria has called an emergency board meeting. They're planning a vote of no confidence to temporarily remove you from leadership." The news left him momentarily speechless. "On what grounds?" "Temporary incapacity due to personal matters. They argue that your family situation is affecting your business judgment and the company's stability." Rage began to boil inside Julian. "I'll be there in 30 minutes. As he hung up, he met Serena's inquisitive gaze. "Business problems?" "Victoria Hayes is making her move," she guessed. "I'm not surprised. I've been investigating the international expansion operations you undertook after our divorce. Someone deliberately gave you bad advice, Julian. Those contracts are designed to weaken the company in the long term." Julian looked at her in surprise. "How do you know?" "Because I know the industry as well as you do, and because I have access to the information as a shareholder. The question is, Jamo, who would benefit from the fall of the Thorne Group?" The answer was obvious. Lawrence Hayes, Victoria's father, and the owner of the rival hotel chain. "I have to go," Julian said, heading toward the house. "Enjoy the party with the kids. I'm coming with you," Serena declared firmly. My shares could be decisive in that vote. The glass and steel building that housed the Thorn Group headquarters shone under the last lights of the sunset. In the boardroom on the top floor, the entire board of directors waited with tense expressions. When Julian walked in, followed by Serena, a murmur of surprise rippled through the room. No one expected his ex-wife to appear alongside the man she was supposedly there to destroy. Victoria, elegantly dressed in a vibrant red suit, could not hide her discomfort at Serena's presence. "This is a private board of directors meeting," she said coldly. "Mrs. Hayes is not authorized to be here." "Mrs. Hayes owns 15% of the shares in this company," Julian replied calmly. "She has every right to be present." Roberto Mendez, as the most senior board member, took the floor. "Julian, this meeting was called to discuss the difficult situation the company is facing. Some board members believe that your current personal circumstances may be affecting your ability to lead effectively." "In other words," Julian interrupted him, "Victoria has convinced you that I need a break while she takes control. Am I wrong?" The uncomfortable silence confirmed his suspicion. "Before we proceed with any vote," he continued, "I would like to present some information that might change the board's perspective." With a gesture, he invited Serena to speak. She stepped forward with the confidence of someone who knows her ground perfectly. "In recent weeks, I have thoroughly analyzed the international expansion contracts signed by this company in the last 3 years," she began, projecting documents onto the large screen. "What I have discovered is, to say the least, concerning." For the next half hour, Serena surgically exposed how the agreement signed under Victoria's advice contained hidden clauses that seriously compromised the company's long-term viability. Worse, she showed how those clauses indirectly benefited Hayes Hospitality Group, Victoria's father's company. "In short," Serena concluded, "we are facing a clear case of conflict of interest that borders on illegality. Ms. Hayes has used her privileged position to systematically weaken the Thorn Group while strengthening her father's company." The silence that followed was so thick you could cut it with a knife. Victoria, pale with fury, jumped to her feet. "This is a slander. I will not allow a scorned woman who left the company 5 years ago to come here and make unfounded accusations." "Unfounded?" Serena smiled calmly. "Every piece of data is supported by documents signed by you yourself, Victoria. And as for being scorned, I remind you that Julian publicly threw me out of his life, not the other way around." Roberto Mendez, visibly agitated by the revelations, intervened. "I think we should postpone any vote until these documents are verified by our legal department." "That seems reasonable," Julian agreed. "Meanwhile, I suggest that Ms. Hayes be temporarily suspended from her duties until this possible conflict of interest is clarified." The vote for this precautionary measure was unanimous, with Victoria's forced abstention. Before leaving the room, she stopped in front of Serena with a look filled with hatred. "This won't be the end," she whispered, so only Serena could hear. "My father and I have invested too much time in this plan for an upstart to ruin everything." Serena held her gaze without flinching. "You should have researched my history better, Victoria. No one who has raised 4 children at the same time is easily scared. What do you think of Serena's strategic genius? How will this corporate battle end? Leave your predictions in the comments below." A house of cards back at the hotel, the atmosphere in the car was strangely intimate. The adrenaline of the confrontation had given way to a shared calm between Julian and Serena. "Thank you," he said finally, breaking the silence. "Not just for today, but for opening my eyes about Victoria. I've been a complete idiot." "You wouldn't be the first man to be manipulated by an attractive woman with a hidden agenda," she replied with an ironic smile. "Besides, I have as much interest as you in the company prospering. It's our children's future. Our children." Those 2 words resonated in Julian's heart, an echo of what could have been, of what might still be. "Why did you really come back, Serena?" he asked, momentarily looking away from the road to observe her profile. You could have sent your lawyers for the shares. You could have contacted me discreetly about Mateo's treatment. Why the dramatic entrance at the party? Why expose yourself like that? Serena remained silent for so long that Julian thought she wouldn't answer. When she finally spoke, her voice had a vulnerability she hadn't shown him in years. Because I needed to see your face when you saw the children. I needed to know if there was anything human left in you. Something of the man I fell in love with. Is there anything left of that man? Julian's question hung in the air. I think he's fighting to get out, she finally answered. But first, he has a lot of demons to overcome. When they arrived at the Grand Summit Hotel, they found the bonfire party in full swing. Eleanor had organized a small bonfire on the private beach, and the children were jumping around it, following the tradition of asking the purifying fire to ward off bad things and bring good luck. Hugo, the most extroverted of the four, ran toward them as soon as he saw them. Dad, Mom, you have to write your wishes. Grandma says it's tradition. It was the first time one of the children had called him that, and the emotional impact was so strong that Julian had to blink back tears. Gabriel approached with 2 small pieces of paper and pencils. You have to write something you want to happen, and something you want to forget, he explained. Then you throw them in the fire, and they come true. Serena and Julian exchanged a knowing look, remembering that distant night of the bonfires, when they were young and in love. As they wrote their wishes, Mateo approached his father cautiously. What are you going to ask for, Dad? He asked curiously. Julian looked at the blank paper, feeling the weight of the last 5 years, of the wrong decisions, of the lost opportunities. Finally, he wrote, I wish to be the father my children deserve, and the man Serena believed I could be. And what did you ask for? He asked his son, carefully folding the paper so no one could read its contents. I asked for all of us to stay together, Mateo replied with a child's honesty. You, Mom, my brothers, Grandma, like a normal family. The simplicity of the boy's wish contrasted painfully with the complexity of the adult's situation. Julian hugged his son, feeling something break and heal at the same time inside him. That's a good wish, he whispered against the boy's hair, identical to his own. A very good wish. When it was time to throw the papers into the fire, the whole family formed a circle. One by one, they cast their wishes into the flames. When it was Serena's turn, Julian thought he saw a tear roll down her cheek. What had she asked for? Was there still room in her heart for the man who had caused her so much pain? As the night progressed, the children, exhausted, finally fell asleep. Eleanor retired to her room, leaving Serena and Julian alone on the terrace, contemplating the last embers of the bonfire and the calm sea under the full moon. You know what's most ironic? Serena commented, breaking the comfortable silence. That when you threw me out that night, I was planning to leave you. The confession surprised Julian. Why? Because I had discovered you weren't the man I thought you were. You had become someone cold, obsessed with power and control, incapable of showing genuine vulnerability or affection. When I found out I was pregnant, I decided to give you one last chance. We both know how that turned out. And now? Julian asked. Who do you think I am now? Serena looked him directly in the eyes. That depends on you, Julian, on the decisions you make from now on. What do you think Serena wished for? What is the most important lesson Julian has learned so far? Leave your comments below. A fresh start. The autumn in Colorado painted the Grand Summit Hotel gardens in shades of ochre and gold. 3 months had passed since that night of the bonfires. Julian, sitting on the porch with a steaming cup of coffee, watched his 4 children play in the garden under Eleanor's watchful eye. The boys had started school in Los Angeles, adapting with surprising ease. Mateo, in particular, showed clear improvement. The treatment developed with Julian's bone marrow was working better than expected. His cheeks, once pale, now had a healthy color, and his energy was increasing daily, allowing him to play almost at the same pace as his brothers. "The results are extraordinary," Dr. Evans had said at the last checkup. "The response to the personalized treatment has exceeded our most optimistic expectations. If he continues like this, in 6 months we could be talking about a complete remission." Those words had lightened the invisible weight Julian had carried since he learned of his son's illness, a son he was only just beginning to know, but who already had an irreplaceable place in his heart. Footsteps interrupted his thoughts. Serena approached with several documents in her hand, and that determined expression he knew so well. "The reports from the external audit have just arrived," she announced, sitting next to him. "It's worse than we thought." After the revelations about Victoria's role in the company's financial debacle, the board had ordered a full audit of all international operations. The preliminary results confirmed the suspicions, a deliberate strategy to weaken the Thorne Group for the benefit of Hayes Hospitality Group. "How much time do we have before the situation is irreversible?" Julian asked, studying the graphs that showed an alarming drop in profit margins. 6 months, maybe less," Serena replied frankly, "unless we implement drastic changes." In recent weeks, they had worked together on a rescue plan. Their professional relationship had evolved, regaining some of the camaraderie that had once united them. They shared the same goal: save the company their children would one day inherit. "I have a proposal," Serena continued, showing him a detailed strategic plan. "While in London, I established valuable contacts with European investors interested in expanding to the US. If we reorient our expansion toward a strategic alliance instead of direct competition, we could reverse the situation." Julian studied the proposal carefully. It was brilliant, innovative, and, most importantly, viable. But it required a fundamental change in his business philosophy. He would have to give up some of the absolute control he had always exercised. "This means completely reorganizing the board of directors," he observed, immediately identifying the most delicate implication. "We would have to appoint new directors for key areas, people we can trust completely," Serena agreed. The proposal also involved another significant change. She would take on the role of Director of International Operations. Her experience in the European market would be crucial. "Are you sure you want to get involved at that level?" Julian asked. "It would mean less time with the children." A melancholic smile appeared on Serena's lips. "I've been a full-time mother for 5 years. The boys are growing up, starting school. It's the perfect time to resume my career, especially if it secures their future." The silence that followed was full of meaning. Both knew that this decision would definitively alter the dynamic between them. They would no longer be simply ex-spouses united by their children, but partners in an ambitious business project. "There's something else you should know," Serena added. "I've received an offer from Lawrence Hayes." Julian visibly tensed. "What kind of offer?" "He wants to buy my shares at a price well above market value. In exchange, he would withdraw the lawsuits he is preparing against you for alleged mismanagement." The news didn't surprise Julian. After Victoria's suspension and the start of the internal investigation, Lawrence had launched an aggressive campaign to further destabilize the company. "What did you tell him?" "That my shares are not for sale, at least not to him." Their gazes met, communicating without words what they both knew. They were together in this battle, united by a bond stronger than past resentment. That same afternoon, while Julian was reviewing old family documents, he found a carved wooden box he didn't remember seeing before. Inside were yellowed letters, faded photographs, and a personal diary with the unmistakable handwriting of his grandfather, George Thorne. Intrigued, he began to read. What he discovered in those pages completely changed his understanding of his family history. George Thorne had not abandoned his family, as he had always been told. He had been forced to distance himself to protect them when he discovered that his business partner and best friend, David Hayes, Serena's grandfather, was involved in illegal activities that could have sent both of them to prison. I'd rather my son hate me, believing me a coward, than see him suffer the consequences of my mistakes, George had written in the last entry, dated shortly before his death. One day, when the danger has passed, I hope the truth comes to light, and he understands that what seemed like abandonment was, in fact, the most painful act of love in my life. Julian felt the world reel. His entire life, he had grown up hating the memory of a grandfather he believed was a coward, a man who had abandoned his family out of selfishness. This discovery not only rehabilitated George's image, but also explained the origin of the pathological fear of abandonment that had marked generations in his family. With the diary in hand, he sought out Serena, who was helping the children with their homework in the living room. "I have to show you something," he said, with an urgency in his voice that made her follow him without question. As Serena read the pages of the diary, her face reflected the same shock Julian had felt. "My grandfather was involved in illegal activities, and yours sacrificed his family relationships to protect all of us." Julian nodded. "This secret has poisoned our families for generations, Serena. My father grew up believing he had been abandoned, developing the same fear that he then passed on to me. And you repeated the pattern," she completed, finally understanding the origin of that innate distrust that had always characterized Julian. "The fear of abandonment led you to abandon first, before you could be abandoned." The truth, so simple and yet so profound, fell upon them like a revelation. The cycle of pain that had tormented a Thorne family for decades could finally be broken. The rescue plan proposed by Serena was presented to the board of directors and, after an intense debate, was approved by a narrow margin. As expected, the reorganization involved painful changes. Several executives loyal to Victoria were relieved of their duties, and new talent joined key positions. Lawrence Hayes, seeing himself deprived of his informant in the company, intensified his media and legal attacks. But the strategy designed by Serena began to bear fruit. The first agreements with European investors injected fresh capital and opened new markets for the Thorne hotels. What was most surprising to those who knew Julian was his ability to adapt to the new shared power structure. For the first time in his career, he was learning to delegate, to trust the judgment of others, to listen to different perspectives. "You've become wiser," Eleanor observed one afternoon, as they watched the children decorate the hotel for Christmas. "I've come to understand what really matters," he replied simply. "And it's not properties or shares." The traditional Christmas Eve dinner at the Grand Summit Hotel had always been a major event on the social calendar. This year, however, Julian had decided it would be an intimate family celebration. Only the closest, Eleanor, Leo, the children, a few lifelong friends, and, of course, Serena, were present. The living room sparkled with Christmas decorations. A huge real tree dominated the space, loaded with traditional ornaments and twinkling lights. Soft carols played in the background, mixing with the laughter and conversations of the guests. Matteo, fully recovered, ran with his brothers around the table where the traditional dinner would be served. His transformation was the best gift Julian could have received. "He's more and more like you every day," Serena commented, approaching with 2 glasses of sparkling cider. "Not just physically, but in his determination, in his way of analyzing every situation before acting." Julian accepted the glass, allowing himself a moment to admire the woman who, against all odds, had returned to his life. "Thank you," he said simply, "for everything, for saving the company, for raising our children so wonderfully, for giving me a second chance I don't deserve." Serena smiled. "We all deserve second chances, Julian. The important thing is what we do with them." When it was time to sit down for dinner, Julian surprised everyone by asking for silence for a special toast. With his glass raised, he looked at each person present, finally stopping at Serena. "Tonight, I want to share something I've recently discovered. That true value is not in keeping up appearances or in accumulating power, but in recognizing our mistakes and working to correct them." His voice, usually firm and authoritative, trembled slightly with emotion. 5 years ago, I made the biggest mistake of my life. I let pride and fear drive me away from the only thing that was truly valuable: my family. Tonight, publicly, I want to ask Serena for her forgiveness for the pain I caused her. Silent tears rolled down Eleanor's and Leo's cheeks. The children watched the scene with curiosity. "I can't change the past," Julian continued, "but I can offer you, Serena, a different future. I'm not asking for us to go back to what we were. I'm asking for the opportunity to build something new, something better, based on mutual respect and love for our children. I'm asking for time to rebuild the trust I destroyed, to show you that I've changed, to maybe one day win back your love." The silence that followed seemed to hold the breath of the entire world. Serena, her eyes bright with unshed tears, finally stood up. "Time has taught us both a lot, Julian. It has shown us that what seemed like a definitive end was, in reality, just a detour on our path. Our children are living proof that sometimes, from the greatest pain, the greatest blessings can be born." Taking her glass, she raised it in a gesture that contained hope and promise. "To second chances, to the family we are rebuilding, to the future that awaits us, whatever its form." As their glasses clinked, sealing that non-verbal pact, the quadruplets ran to hug their parents, forming a perfect circle of love and possibility. Outside, the warm December night of Los Angeles enveloped the hotel in a gentle sea breeze. The stars shone brightly over the Pacific, silent witnesses to a story that, like so many others, had needed to move away from its origin to finally find its true destiny. What do you think is the ultimate message of this story? Let me know your thoughts on this new beginning.